Hello and welcome to the FMCC World FM Day Virtual Conference. Today's session is Learn How to Maximize Your Wins and Minimize Your Losses Through Your Successful FM Consultant Relationships, Finding True Value in the Consulting Relationships. Today's presenters are Mark Sekula, Peter Stroup, Rich Fanelli, Teena Shouse, and Darlene Frantz. Next slide, please. I do want to let everyone know they have been muted for audio quality. If you do have any questions at any time during this webinar, please feel free and type them into the question box, and we'll review them at the end during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you would like a copy of the PDF of the handout, please feel free to go through your control panel to the handout section, expand it, and you can click and download a PDF copy immediately. Next slide, please. The FMCC does provide many services to the FM community, such as Ask the Expert, Find a Consultant, Locate a Speaker, and online educational resources. You may find more information at their website, fmcc.ifma.org. Next slide, please. And as always, we would like to thank our sponsors. And next slide, please. And this being World FM Day, we just want to give a big thank you to everyone, all of you FMs, and that we are celebrating this internationally. We started in the morning, well actually it would be yesterday, I guess it was morning in New Zealand, and going all the way through the hemispheres, working our way back to North America. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Next slide, please. And this map shows you, okay, and again, this is just 18 sessions. The FMCC did a great job of putting together 18 sessions over 31 hours, like I said, starting yesterday. Next slide. And this map just kind of gives you a demonstration of where all the presenters are from throughout the course of those 31 hours. They worked very hard to truly make it global in nature to really live up to that World FM Day. Next slide. And here you see the 25 speakers that really made this possible. Without them, there would not be a virtual conference to put on for you all. So we do want to thank them for all the hard effort they put into it, and the moderators are there as well. Next slide. Okay, at this time I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our esteemed panel. Mark, I believe you're starting it.
Thank you very much, Joshua, and welcome to our presentation today. And happy World FM Day. I'm Mark Sekula. I am your moderator. I think this is being recorded, so you'll have a copy of this, and you'll have this slide that tells you all about the CEUs and the CFM maintenance points. And this is presented by the IFMA FM Consultants Council. Again, my name is Mark Sekula. I have about 40 years of experience as a FM practitioner and consultant and educator. And our esteemed panel includes Teena Shouse, who is principal of FM Transitions. She has over 29 years of experience in facility management, served as chairwoman of the IFMA Board of Directors, and has held a great number of different positions as a volunteer with the IFMA organization. Rich Fanelli is president of Fanelli McLean, a commercial interior planning and design firm in Fairfax, Virginia. He is the former president of the IFMA Consultants Council and the Capital Chapter. He's served on the board of directors. He's been an IFMA instructor since 1933. No, 1993.
I'm not that old.
Sorry, Rich.
He's holding really well.
Yeah, Rich is like 140 years old. He is an instructor at George Mason and teaches at Catholic University as well. Peter Stroup is director of facilities at the Harvard Medical School, and he oversees about 2.7 million square feet teaching and medical research space, which keeps him very busy. And he has over 30 years of experience in facility construction, project management, and basically all aspects of facility maintenance and operations. Darlene Frantz is Executive Director, Real Estate and Facilities Management at ManTech International Corporation, a $2 billion defense contractor, also in Fairfax, Virginia. She serves on the executive committee for the IFMA Capital Chapter, Vice President of Sponsorship and Treasurer of that chapter, and she is the former Vice President of Programs for that chapter. So just a quick review of what the learning objectives are. We want to identify the trigger points that require you as a facility management practitioner to bring on a consultant. Understand your organization's procurement policy so that you know how to go about bringing that consultant on within the parameters of your organization. How to ensure that the new consultant is going to be a good fit for your team. Setting the ground rules and expectations in a new consulting relationship, and then a few case studies. So I'd like to open it up by asking the very first question, and that is about the trigger points in selling the need for an outside consultant. So what are some of the trigger points that require an FM to bring on a consultant to supplement his or her FM team? And I'll throw that out to the panel.
So Mark, this is Darlene Frantz. I can probably take that on here quickly. Being an end user and having 70 facilities across the nation, also being aligned underneath the Chief Financial Officer organization here within ManTech, one of the main trigger points for us to bring on a consultant would be to help limit our firm's liability or exposure to risk for things such as life safety concerns, egress, fire suppression, and then some secondary items when we get into real specialty spaces that require maybe gas agent fire suppression, UPS, generator, very technical needs that we really don't want to be engineering internally. We really want to be doing the architecture, the engineering, or whatever the vendor services. We want to have that outsourced so that we push our liability out to that third-party expert. Staff augmentation would be another reason why we would want to go to a third-party consultant agreement, situation like that. And we do that quite a bit with various special projects that we have, whether or not we need to add a skill set to our team, or if we just have to add bandwidth because everyone's engaged in other projects around the country. So those would be the two key things that I've got to offer. I don't know if Peter has some other ideas.
Thanks, Darlene. This is Peter. Yeah, certainly from our viewpoint, third-party assessments are critical, and just a couple of examples are asset condition assessments that are done by third parties, and of course anything to do with Legionella or chemistry, water chemistry, are areas that we frequently use a third-party consultant to offer us advice. In addition to staff augmentation, of course, any schedule constraint that we have that we can't meet with our own staff, a consultant is generally a big help. And there's this situation that I've faced in many companies, including here at the medical school, is very often, while you are most likely the most knowledgeable in the area, it always seems as though a third party has more credibility than you when it comes to the tough decisions. And so to bring in a third party, a consultant, to assist in decision-making or influencing decision-making often brings more credibility in the eyes of others to the decision. And lastly, I would say, if you ever wondered if you're in line or out of line with industry standards or best practices, benchmarking and validation is certainly an avenue that we would use as a trigger for bringing in a consultant. And we're going to talk a little bit about case study, and I'll come back to that point again, that where you stand against the industry and best practices is really a real benefit of acquiring the help of a consultant, particularly those who have a vast array of experience. So from our perspective, Those are many of the trigger points that would trip us for a consultant.
Thanks, Peter. And that's a great lead into the next question, which is, it's often difficult to quantify the true value of a consultant. That being said, how do you sell the need for a consultant to senior management? Because when you approach them about a consultant, one of the first questions they ask is, why do you need a consultant? That's why we hired you. So how do you sell that to senior management?
Well, this is Peter again. I'll just keep running along here with that. You know, it's important for management to understand that none of us know it all. And anyone who thinks they do, I'd like to meet them. It's, you know, a situation of when I was certainly young, early in my career and younger, I was afraid to ask for help. I had that very concern that that was a sign of weakness, and the expectation was that I would know it all. But as the years went by, I quickly understood that raising your hand and asking for help and having the ability to ask for help is really not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. Selling the need for us, particularly when it comes to the financial aspect, is if you can anticipate that need and build that into a forthcoming budget, that's certainly a much easier sell than it is to try and fund an activity like that out of budget. Having clear scope and expectations, and for us, certainly outlining the alternatives and the consequences. You know, if we don't bring in a consultant, here are the other alternatives, and here are the consequences of not doing that or of doing that. I know at some point we'll likely touch on terms and conditions, which is certainly one aspect of selling the need. You know, what kind of pricing, what kind of insurance carries, all that sort of thing are items that more senior management will evaluate when processing a request like that. But I think the key for us is if you've got a clear scope and you understand the expectations and you've been able to anticipate, it's a much easier sell than otherwise. Sure. And maybe others, maybe Rich, you have some more you can add there.
Yeah, I would say just making management aware that you know, that your staff cannot do it all, and that sometimes you are stretched to your limits, and bringing on an outside consultant is a way to effectively augment the limitations of your internal staff. Yeah, many times, you know, we act as a almost an extension of an FM department, and you know, and some of my employees, you know, who are frequently working with the same FM organization over many years, sometimes, you know, the employees of that FM organization think that they're full-time employees. So, you know, and Darlene, I don't know if you want to piggyback on that.
Well, I mean, that's exactly the case. You know, I know we need to probably move on from this slide, but you know, it is a real value for us to be able to use a consultant time and time again, and then kind of feel like we do have it embedded in our organization, so that we have consistency across the portfolio, consistency across the nation, and we're not using, you know, a variety of architectural vendors or a variety of engineering vendors. And so for us, that consistency, being able to go back and back, we're also able to show senior management by doing that with our reporting and our assessments, how we're able to look at our portfolio consistently and then provide consistent data to them to make decisions. So it's definitely helpful with that.
Sure.
Those are, and, this is Teena. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to kind of lead into that. Yes, and any time that we go to senior management and ask for, you know, funding for whether it's a project or consultant, you know, we need to write that business case, because we need to do things and you know, make things in business terms. And I know, Teena, that you've written a lot of business cases.
Yeah, and that is true. This is just like any other project. Building a business case, if you really want to sell it, and this is something that we work a lot with clients on, and facility managers in total, they have to create a business case in order to sell this opportunity. But I think it starts with and a couple of the speakers have already kind of touched on this, but just to kind of tie it up, it's really looking at value added based on the gap analysis. So like with any other business case, you need to determine what are the resources you need and why do you need them, but you need to do a gap analysis. Is it bandwidth that you don't have? Is it lack of talent? Is it is it something that is sporadic that you don't need to bring on a full FTE, but you just need to augment, like Rich was talking about, augment your existing staff? It's really being able to, in the business case, so I think it's really important for you to be extremely realistic in your expectations of this relationship and of what the consultant can do, and we're going to talk a lot about that in a little bit on making sure it's a good fit, but also really being able to clearly convey the real value to the organization to bring on this new relationship.
Great, thank you. One of the things that we need to understand when we are thinking about bringing on a consultant is, how do we do that? How do we align with our own organization's procurement policies? We have to understand our organization's procurement policies, the rules, the regulations, the types of contracts allowed. Do we have to go out for an RFP, sole sourcing, et cetera? So we have to know all of those kinds of things. So the question for the panel is, should a consultant be able to agree with all of an organization's terms and conditions in order to get hired, and if not, should they be awarded the contract?
So Mark, this is Darlene. I can chime in on this one. Again, just being an end user, we do have a variety of consulting relationships, and we run through this with our procurement office, quite often. So, one of the things that we try to do within our small department here is we try to pre-work our relationships with our procurement team to help them understand the type of work we do. We're not buying widgets typically. We're typically buying services. And so it's a little bit different animal for the procurement team, where they're just a little more accustomed in a large company like ours to buying things and widgets. And so that's really helped them to understand, what we're trying to procure and how we're trying to procure it when we go to put out RFPs. So we do try to pre-work those relationships with the procurement office. And from a T's and C's perspective, we do try to include those up front in our RFP so that when we go out to various vendors, they can take a look at that up front and they kind of know what they're getting into. They can send it to their legal department. It just helps sort of grease the wheels should we end up going down the road, with that particular vendor. It just allows a little bit more time for the legal reviews that need to happen there. Then the last thing I'd say on that is that one of the other things that we do to help make the procurement process more streamlined, I guess, would be that we try to work with the vendor that's been awarded the contract. We really try to work with them on how their invoices look, the data that they put on those invoices, and try to make sure that that matches the purchase order that was provided, and certain scopes of work are identified as we run through various projects. This is really imperative for us to help us survive all the government audits that we go through, since we're a defense contractor to the United States government. So those would be the three key things that we kind of look at when we're trying to work with our procurement office and their policies. Rich, do you have some stuff?
Yeah. 2 points that I want to make is that I get a lot of RFPs from procurement people, and most procurement people don't have a technical background, so it's really important that the procurement people, as well as the internal lawyers, work with the facilities people who have the more technical background in developing a good RFP. It's a lot easier for a consultant to respond to a well-written RFP that has the right technical requirements than to have to go back and forth with dozens and dozens of questions and then wait for answers. The second point I want to bring up is that most consultants do have insurance policies, especially errors and omissions insurance policies, that they have to agree to, they need to agree to not agree to certain stipulations which can nullify their errors and omissions insurance. So the line in the sand that I always draw is that I don't want to agree to any terms and conditions that will nullify or avoid my errors and omissions insurance coverage. And I say to my clients or prospective clients, it's not in their interest to make me agree to language that would not be covered by my errors and omissions insurance, because then if, God forbid, they should ever sue me, knock on wood, then they're not going to get anything either. So, if the consultant can explain that to the lawyers, to the procurement people, 9 times out of 10, if the client is reasonable, they'll understand that and they'll modify the language.
And I'm just going to go to the next slide because it kind of blends in with what we just talked about. We need to, in order to have a good partnership and relationship between the consultant and the client, we have to make sure that there's a good fit. And it's the same thing with procurement. Even though sometimes FM and procurement, that relationship is somewhat adversarial, it really needs to be a partnership. And so speaking of good fit, for the client and consultant relationship to work effectively, they must be a good fit as well. And so the question is, what does being a good fit actually mean to you?
Mark, I'll chime in on this one. A good fit to our team really means that we have a strong relationship that's hopefully over time based on trust with our preferred vendors. And I think that we've been able to prove over time, as we said earlier, that consistency of being able to work with one vendor for a period of years has really proven to provide consistency to our organization. And an example or a counter example of that would be that there was a period of time where someone on our board of directors here had a relationship with another architectural firm than the one that we were using, and they really, really wanted us to give this group a try. So we did, and it was a really large group, probably a little bit more name recognition than the architect that we work with regionally. And so we gave them a try, and sure enough, what we thought might happen happened, which was we started out and we had their senior architect and their senior VP presenting and coming to meetings, and then as soon as we got through some of the programming, it got turned over to a very, very junior, designer who was maybe 3 months out of school, and then our team ended up having to kind of help her along with all kinds of data and standards, and to help her, get the drawings through to complete construction drawings. So it ended up really costing our staff a lot more time. So from my perspective, really working with an architectural firm that understands your skill set, you have a great relationship, you've maybe built some trust over a couple of years on how everyone works, and you have open lines of communication, that has just been extremely beneficial to us. And we really appreciate the firm that we're with, where we don't get sort of, kind of sent down to the junior architect who's just coming on board and learning the ropes. So.
And this is Rich. I've got an interesting perspective recently, where at the same time I had 2 projects going on recently, where one client was the client from hell and the other client was the client from heaven, and it gave me an opportunity to really contrast, what makes for a good client on the consultant side, and what it comes down to is, as Darlene says, trust. That the client trusts you to do what is in their best interest, and to use your professional experience and knowledge to come up with beneficial solutions and approaches. But the other thing too is that it's good for the consultant to work with a knowledgeable client. And those clients that understand the process, those clients that have done numerous projects and they know what works and what doesn't work, they have a whole new appreciation of working with a qualified consultant versus an inexperienced or unqualified client that thinks that they know everything, but they really don't know everything. So, and then, of course, working with a consultant that does the kind of work that is required. You know, the project type, they have a lot of experience with the project type. You know, they've done a lot of projects of a similar size and scope and all that, and that makes for a good fit too. And any consultant that pretends that they're able to do a particular project that they've never done before, you've just got to be a little wary of that. So you know, if I was talking to an FM that's never used an architectural firm before, I would say, make sure you know who your project team is that you're hiring. Make sure you know what their role is and how often they're going to be involved. You know, call their references. Make sure that they have happy clients that are recent clients. And the question I always ask them to say is, you know, give us your client references for the last 3 projects that you've done for each of the key team members to make sure that you know exactly what you're buying.
Sure. And you know, you know, a lot of what all of you just said is really good about how to get that good fit from the very start. You know, putting out expectations, everybody's on the same page. But how do you maintain that good fit throughout the entire project?
This is Teena. I think it starts with building a good scope for the objectives in the first place, and really building realistic expectations of the consultant. It kind of builds on what Rick said, is that once you've started and you've got your foot in the door, you need to maintain it. The best thing that I've always relied on, and this is in any realm of business, but also mainly, most of all in consulting, is communicate, communicate, communicate. You can almost not over-communicate with your client, and you know, just being very open and also measuring along the way. Are the expectations really being met, and not assuming that everything's going along great, and the next thing you know, you get a phone call that says, you know, we're not happy with what you're doing. So really realistically moving that along. And you know, Peter, you might be able to talk just a minute about how you and I made sure that we maintained that good fit.
Peter, are you out there? Maybe he's on mute.
Somebody's on mute.
You hear me now?
There you
Yeah,
go.
we can hear you now. There you go.
Sorry. I will reiterate Teena's comment about communication. The constant communication is absolutely key, but it's what you talk about. You know, that you have to be forthcoming, have to be brutally honest. It doesn't necessarily mean it always has to be on the record, but to maintain that good fit, you have to have that respect, you have to have that honesty, you have to be able to put politics aside and just be as brutally honest as possible.
Oops, sorry. And sometimes we add complexity to this whole thing, this whole relationship, because we have subcontractors or subconsultants involved in the project with whom we may not, or with whom the FM may not hold the direct contract. They may have the contract with the main consultant. So the question is, how do you ensure that that same relationship and fit is established with that subconsultant?
I'll just answer that very, very simply. I think you need to make sure that you know who's driving the bus. Does that subcontractor report to you as the prime, or do they report directly to the client? Because that can sometimes get a little messy. So making sure that you are either you're holding that one end of the bridge, or you're holding the other, or you're the glue that's keeping, or the brace that's keeping the two together. But I think it's really important for everybody to understand who that subcontractor really relates, who they report to, what their line of responsibility is, and what that relationship is, and making sure that it's fairly communicated. And that will eliminate any kind of confusion and make sure that the subcontractor talents are truly being taken, taken into consideration and being taken advantage of.
Yeah, this is Rich. One thing I want to piggyback on is, just make sure that you, the FM, really understand, what history does that prime contractor and subcontractor have? Do they have a successful history of working together? We have in-house mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers. That's a separate company, but we've been working with them for over 20 years, and so that's sort of an extreme example of a good working relationship that has been lasting for 20 years. So you don't want to agree to a contract where they're going to be using a subconsultant that the prime has never worked with before.
That's a very, very good point, Rich. Yeah.
Yes. And a good consultant, one of the things that that we as consultants need to be very concerned with and focused on is that we have to be unbiased, and sometimes we have to tell the client something they really don't want to hear. I heard Peter say a little while ago something about brutal honesty. So can anyone on the panel tell us about a time that happened like that happened to them, and how you handled it, where you had to really tell something to the client that they probably didn't want to hear?
This is Rich. I have a sort of a funny story. This happened with the Washington Post, and we were working with Don Graham, who was Katharine Graham's son, and Katharine Graham had just recently died, and they wanted to move a lot of their executives out of a leased building next door into owned real estate adjacent to the rest of the executives. And so we started doing the space planning process, and we realized that we couldn't fit all the executives onto 2 contiguous floors. So I said to Don Graham and all these senior level Washington Post managers at a meeting, I said, the only way that you're going to be able to fit all of these executives onto 2 contiguous floors in your own headquarters building is if you got rid of Mrs. Graham's garden court. And her garden court, was her beloved garden court with her 30-year-old wisteria. And all of the executives went and gasped, and they said, "Oh, you can't do that." And I said, well, if you did that, you'd be able to probably, pay for, if you infilled Mrs. Graham's garden court into usable office space, it would probably pay for itself in 3 years. And they said, really? Can you crunch the numbers on that and see if it'll work? So I came back in a couple of days with crunched numbers, and it showed that it would pay itself back. The return on investment would be 3 years, and they said, good, let's go ahead and do it. But, at first, I proposed something that they would have never have considered in a million years. So sometimes, an outsourced consultant can be the bearer of new ideas, not necessarily bad news, but new ideas, as opposed to somebody internal, and that's internal to the company, that couldn't suggest that in a million years.
Right. Well, my example doesn't involve crushed numbers or crushed hysteria, but I did not too long ago. This happened during an RFP transition phase. We were helping the client with an RFP for new service for their FM operation. And I had to be brutally candid when during the transition phase, it became very clear that some of the people that were on the end of this process were sharing their expectations were not matching what had already been agreed to in the formal agreement. And virtually they were trying to change the scope of the project after the agreement had already been signed, and they were just kind of late coming to the party. And so I had to stand kind of between the two and work as an arbitrator or a marriage counselor or brutally honest consultant and say, this is what's been agreed to and this is what we're going to roll out. Now, if you want to renegotiate this later, we can. But for right now, in order to keep this moving, we have to stay within what has already been agreed upon. And it was a little warm in the room a couple of times, but we got through it.
Well, we've talked a little bit about expectations and establishing those expectations at the very beginning of a consultancy relationship with the client. So, just as facility managers establish a service level expectation with their internal customers, the occupiers of their buildings, setting the ground rules and expectations in a new consulting relationship is critical as well. So what are some of the ground rules and expectations that a facility manager and a consultant should address before the work begins? Which you might have had something to say about that.
Yeah, I thought Peter was going to jump in there, but you know, in any given facilities project, there are many different project managers, especially with outsourced services. So the last thing you want to do is to have the various project managers to be stepping on each other's feet. So it's really important that that the roles and responsibilities are clearly defined. And I think, as Teena said previously, that the end results are established and the expectations are established too. The desired methods of communication need to be outlined. You know, the responsiveness and the turnarounds for reviews and approvals need to be determined. And you know, who the key points of contact are. The consultants also need to understand how decisions are going to be made on the client's end, so that they, you know, they don't go, you know, running things, you know, to the wrong person for decisions. If there are dollar thresholds for decisions to be made, you know, the consultants need to know what those dollar thresholds are. So that they understand that, hey, you know, if something has to be approved midway through the project that's over a certain dollar amount, it may take longer because it has to go through more layers of bureaucracy. So those things are the tripping points that I've always run up against.
So this is Peter from a FM perspective. Certainly, understanding the limitations of the scope. The last thing that we can really tolerate is, you know, having a consultant who wanders off the range a little bit and goes down a path that you're really not interested in or focused on or even concerned about. So setting those boundaries early. Another attribute is confidentiality. It's really important that if you're going to be frank with each other, that you have some confidence that that's not going to be shared with others beyond the relationship you have with that consultant. Establishing a good work plan, having a schedule with milestones, and understanding what those threats to the schedule might be. I'll reiterate again two important points that continue to improve our relationship with consultants is being honest with each other and establishing regular communication. The regular communication ensures that you're staying with the ground rules and that you're working within the ground rules. And as I said initially, setting the boundaries, the regular communication helps you to pull people back in or redirect the consultant in the direction that you really wanted them to focus. So I think that ground rules and expectations are key. They need to be understood as early as possible, and that regular communication is the reinforcement vehicle.
And Peter, the communication, I mean, that's kind of the thread throughout this whole presentation in terms of the relationship between the consultant and the FM. And you know, as consultants, we have great ideas, and sometimes, you know, we sort of maybe take one of those ideas and sort of run with it, and it may not be in line with what the client might be thinking. And if we don't have those regular communication, things can kind of get derailed really quickly. So a communication is it's critical to that relationship. So one type of project we see FMs often hiring consultants for are design construction projects in the form of a project manager or a construction manager, or in the case of Rich, an architect or an engineer. Does a consultant help the client mitigate risk during design and construction during that process?
Yeah, this is Rich. Absolutely, and as this graphic here shows, it's two issues that you're looking at to mitigate risk. It's the likelihood of the risk happening, and it's also, if it does happen, what is the impact of having that risk happen. So when you look at the meaning of the word mitigate, it doesn't necessarily mean that the risk goes away. It just means that if it does happen, that the consequences or the impact of that risk is lessened. And so you need to have an experienced outsourced team member as well as internal team members to help you avoid these risks because experience is key. You know, having an alternative backup plan should the risk happen, having that already established, having contingency money, a pot of contingency money, you know, absolutely that should be a must, a given for every single project, so that if something does go wrong, you have the funds to take care of those additional costs, you know, should they be needed. And the best rule of thumb is to put your best people on the highest risk items. So you see a little red box there that says extreme. Make sure that your best person, whether it's an internal person or an outsourced person, is assigned to that to trying to avoid or mitigate that highest risk issue or item.
Yeah, there's you know, risk. When we think about risk, we think about, you know, emergency preparedness and construction projects and things. But there's risk in every sort of consultant-client relationship, and it's, you know, necessary, as you said, Rich, to identify what those risks are, and the ones that are probable with a high impact. As you said, we need to pay special attention to those because if they do come up, again, they can derail a project, so we need to have a plan in our hip pocket to deal with that risk.
You know, one question that a facility manager may want to ask when they're interviewing a consultant is to ask a question like, have you ever experienced a high-level risk on a project, and what did you do to help solve that risk? And it's basically one of those scenario questions, just to see how that, or you can name what the scenario is. If this should happen, how would you address it? And that'll give you an idea of how experienced that person is at managing risk.
Excellent. Part of the risk management process is assigning responsibility, as you said, Rich, and sometimes sharing that responsibility. And I know, Teena, you have some strong feelings about that. Can you expound on the meaning of sharing that responsibility when it comes to risk?
I do, and Rich has brought up a lot of really good fundamental points. But I think if you wrap that up into one sentence or one thought, it's that the responsibility needs to be honest and forthcoming. It needs to be an honest and forthcoming of ownership and accountability. And that's what makes this relationships work, is really everybody understanding what they're accountable for. You know, a true partnership has no finger pointing. It's like a good marriage or a good relationship. It's truly a partnership, and only through having that true relationship and partnership and not finding blame but finding resolve when things do happen, because things are going to happen. I don't care if you have the best client and the best consultant in the world, things are going to happen. It's all about recovery, and recovery is what makes a good relationship, and that means sharing that process of recovery, because that's when we all win together.
And that's a great segue to this last part of our presentation, which is case studies. Case studies are always a great way to demonstrate a point. And Peter and Teena, I know that you two have worked together in the past, and you've worked together very, very well. How did you create a win-win relationship between you know, the client, Peter, and the consultant, Teena?
Peter always tells the story better. He always tells the story better, so I'm going to let him tell it.
Okay, and Teena, you chime in and correct me, please.
As always.
I think the best way for me to characterize this is to put it into context. We outsource all of our FM services, And there came a point at which we were very, very frustrated with our service provider. There were a number of issues that weren't getting resolved. We didn't seem to get the right attention. And so we started to have a little bit of self-doubt. You know, are we really being realistic in our expectations? Are we out of the norm? Are we complying with industry standard or not complying with industry standard? Are we realistic at all about our expectations? So that was the context in which I contacted Teena. We had known each other in the past. I knew that Teena had, my expression, dirt under the fingernails. She had loads of experience, understood the dynamics of outsourcing, and understood the ins and outs of operations and maintenance. So what we concluded was that, yes, she's the right person to come in, give us an unbiased view, let us know, again, back to what I said at the beginning of this webcast, you know, benchmark, tell us whether we're in line or out of line. So we established an agreement for a short engagement. Answering a question some people may have about, you know, does a consultant have to be present during the entire evolution of the task? And so the answer to that is no, that we actually forwarded Teena our 100-plus page contract. She had the opportunity to evaluate that contract, see what our performance requirements were, what our scope was and expectations. And then because we believed it was part of a culture issue, Teena came here to the medical school here in Boston, and as she hit the ground, we presented her with a briefing book. And so the briefing book had organization charts, it had lists of issues, a number of appropriate type background materials. It also included an interview schedule so that Teena could not only interview the medical school staff here, but also the service provider. And then after collecting all of that, we had a real sanity check-in. We were talking about staffing levels, and Teena was able to reach out. You talked about subcontractors and others. She was able to reach out elsewhere and bring in some APA information, which is pertinent to academia and facilities management. She asked us tough questions. You know, some of those questions, as Mark alluded to earlier, you know, why aren't you conducting all this work yourselves? Why aren't you outsourcing, or why are you outsourcing and not taking control of this on your own? And there are a number of answers that I'd rather not share at the moment, but you know, there was good reason for that. So we went through questions like that. Are we making the right capital investments? Do we have the right people here on campus? So after a short period of time, and after a few days on site with Teena, she came back with a list of recommendations. We talked all those recommendations through, plenty of communication back and forth in that process. And what I really appreciated then was a follow-up on, a couple of follow-ups on the part of Teena that was not expected, when she said, well, you know, what did you do with the recommendations? Which ones did you accept? Which ones did you modify? Which ones did you not accept? And then even months later was out of the blue, a call from Teena was, so how are you doing? Have things improved? What, you know, what's your situation today? So that's really our story about one very particular situation that, you know, we couldn't see the forest for the trees any longer and needed some help. And Teena, as consultant, came in and really bailed us out. And for those of you who are interested in the epilogue, yeah, our expectations were not extreme. They were in line with the industry, and we were able to resolve those issues and have since been on a path to improvement. This wasn't but I think somewhere in the last 20 months maybe, and we're very thankful for having that opportunity. Teena, did you want to add any more to that?
I just never get tired of hearing you tell the story. No, this has been a great example. I mean, it really is. You know, we had the good fortune of knowing each other, and I think that started it because there was that level of trust. And you know, Peter mentioned the follow-up, and I think that's probably one of those things where, you know, my advice to the consultants that are listening to this is, you know, go that extra mile and create that long-term relationship. Because when you do make that phone call and it's unexpected, people really do appreciate when you do go a bit and beyond of the original task that you first bid on. So thank you for sharing that, Peter.
Yeah, this is Rich. One of the things as a design firm owner that I try to keep in mind whenever we're starting a new client relationship is to match the project team, and especially the project manager, to be compatible with the personality of the client or the client's main point of contact. Because, you know, when you're working closely together with a client as a consultant, you know, you need to like each other. And it always helps to have compatible personalities. So I have to be somewhat empathetic to, you know, personality matching when I'm assigning a team to a new client.
Rich?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So that brings us pretty much to the end. So we have a couple minutes for questions. Let me just quickly kind of summarize what we've talked about today. FMs need to understand what the trigger points are so they know when they do need a consultant, and then they need to sell the need to senior management through a good business case, a strong business case. We have to align our procurement policies with our FM policies so that we know how to go out and get those consultants, what the processes are. We need to work hard to ensure a good fit between the consultant and the client, and that's establishing expectations early on. Rich just said something about, you know, we have to like each other, but we also have to respect each other. There has to be a mutual respect. We need to set the ground rules and those expectations, and we also have to share responsibility when risks do come to reality. So we've got a couple minutes left, and I'm going to turn it back over to Joshua for any questions from the audience, because I don't know how to go about doing that. So Joshua?
Yes. If you do have any questions, please go to your control panel, and under the question section, just feel free to type your question in there, and I'll be happy to present it to our panel. I do have a question here, and they're thinking this might apply from Darlene. It's like, you mentioned risk as a triggering factor to bring in a consultant. Do you have a particular process in-house to assess risk?
We do. However, I guess it depends on the risk that you're talking about. We have a risk mitigation department, or we call it a risk management department. So it really handles all of the insurance issues for the company worldwide. But when it comes to the design and construction and the maintenance and facilities management, the day-to-day operations of all the spaces that we manage, that's when the risk really gets defined, more like some of the ones I noted, like life safety, the ways that we egress through all of our tenant spaces, fire suppression, generator fumes, UPS systems and shutoffs, for when we have power losses and emergency lighting, things like that. Those would be the risk factors that we just had an emergency lighting situation in one of the buildings. It's an older building. The landlord had this is in the United States, so they had some old like bug-eye lamps that were battery pack driven. It's a very old building. And but some of the space had been retrofitted to be hardwired and to have your overhead fluorescent lights be the emergency, lighting. And so we realized that we had a gap between what, some of the areas where the building was really responsible for in the common areas and some of the areas that had become tenant-driven areas. So we had to do a whole assessment, and in that case, we went outside to our third-party consultants for electrical engineering, and we had them do an assessment of the building, because that is, again, it's just a huge risk to our firm. We don't want to have an emergency in a building where there's not adequate pathway lighting that meets code. And so in that condition, we would absolutely go out to a third-party vendor to help mitigate our risks. I hope that's an example that helps explain, an area where we might go out and seek a third-party vendor or consultant.
Great. And do you make use of scenarios and risk modeling software either in-house or with a consultant?
Again, if it would really be like risk modeling software, it would probably fall more into our risk management department. It wouldn't probably fall into my department. The risk conditions that we see, again, in design and construction are pretty self-evident. So I don't use modeling software at this time in the real estate department.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This one is towards Teena. One has to be careful asking clients the tough questions sometimes, unless you have developed a strong and great relationship with the client. Do you agree with this?
Absolutely. But I think you build that relationship by asking some of those tough questions. I don't think you have to, you don't have to be as comfortable with an individual as I am with Peter or with Rich or other people that I've, worked with in the industry. You build that relationship by having the tenacity or the confidence or knowing the need that you do have to ask those questions. And so I think that you were just kind of namby-pamby and didn't be as bold. I mean, they're hiring you for your expertise. And I don't mean to be bold in a negative way or a bossy way, but they're hiring you for your expertise. You owe them those answers. You owe them to ask those tough questions. That's what they're paying you for.
Great, excellent. And we're pretty much at time, so let's try to get through the last few slides so we can wrap this up. Mark, if you don't mind, there we go. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Okay, and that's the contact information on screen for the panelists. And like I said, if you want a copy of this, on the control panel, there's a PDF of the PowerPoint, so you can get all of their contact information off that. Next slide. And I do want to let everybody know the FMCC does have an annual scholarship to honor Kit Tuvison. The deadline is August 19th. For information to see if you qualify or you want to submit for that, go to, obviously, the FMCC website. You can go to fmcc.fma.org or fmcc-workplace.com. I encourage you to go for that. Or if you know, so if you read the qualification, you know someone that would be a good candidate, also forward that on to them. And the FMCC is always looking for great volunteers for the STAG committee for their education professional development portion. Gay Tuttle is the chair for the STAG. Contact her at gaytuttle.cfm@gmail.com. That's GAYTUTTLE.cfm@gmail.com. And I'm sure she would be thrilled to get an email from you. Next slide, please. And this is just to let you know some goings on for Global FM. They actually are celebrating Global FM Week, is my understanding. So keep an eye out for that hashtag World FM Day on Twitter. Next slide, please. And here are some remaining sessions. Unfortunately, there was a last-minute cancellation for session 15, so we're just going to go straight to session 16 with Bill Connolly and Chris Leak to go over the Knowledge Library. And that's a great resource available to all members, so I would encourage you to attend that so you can learn more about that member benefit and how you can benefit from that. And then there will be the integrating FM into design. And the FMCC always likes to let everyone know about the other councils that are out there and that they are great resources for you. On behalf of the FMCC, I want to thank the panel for a great presentation, and I also want to thank everyone for attending. Have a great World FM Day, everybody.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
Take care all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.